Happy Friday. I know that last video was dark. I had to do it the night before. Today is in the daylight. Today we're going to finish Bud Not Buddy. Could be a little long, so I better get going. It's just one chapter, but it's 22 pages. But we get the full story. Man, ever since he heard me call my mama's name, Herman E. Calloway has locked himself in his room and will not come out. Mr. Jimmy and Miss Thomas made me sit at the kitchen table while they knocked on his door. They tried to talk him into opening up, but the way they kept saying Herman, soft at first, then louder and louder, it sounded like he wasn't talking back. After the longest while, they decided to let the big baby have his own way and come back downstairs. They sat at the kitchen table with me. Miss Thomas looked at me and said, my. Mr. Jimmy said, now look here, Bud. He wiped his hands over his face. You sure your mama's name was Angela Janet? I said, yes, sir. And the two of you both had the same last name? Her last name was Caldwell, too, right? She never said anything about it being Calloway. I spelt it out for him. I said, no, sir, her name was Caldwell. 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 It seemed like he finally believed me. He said, okay, I hope you don't mind me asking, but it's pretty important that we know. How did your mama pass? How long ago? Pass was like gone. It was another one of them words grown-up folks use instead of dead. I said, I was 6 years old when it happened, sir. I don't know why, but she was too sick to go to work for 6 days in a row. And then one morning, I went into her room, and she was dead. She didn't suffer or nothing. It happened real quick. She didn't even have time to close her eyes. She didn't even look like it hurt or nothing. Miss Thomas reached across the table and touched my arm. She said, I'm sure it didn't, Bud. I'm sure it was very peaceful for her. Mr. Jimmy said, when she was living, Bud, God rest her soul, what did your mama look like? That was another strange question. Before I could answer, Miss Thomas said, James, what are you insinuating? I knew there was something familiar about this boy. I didn't know how I missed it before, but look at his eyes. You have to ask if this is Herman's grandchild? Mr. Jimmy said, now hold on, Grace. I'm just trying to ask the questions I know Herman would ask if he could. Ain't a thing wrong with being certain before we jump to conclusions here. Now, what'd she look like, son? Oh, she was real pretty. Mr. Jimmy said, I bet she was. Bud, that ain't what I meant. Was she short? Was she tall? Was she slim? Was she big-boned? I said, I don't know, sir. She was real pretty and real tall and kind of skinny like me, I guess. Miss Thomas said, James, Bud was 6 years old. Everyone on earth was real tall to him. Okay, I don't see the point of all this. I said, pardon me, ma'am. I know how I can show you what she looks like. I still have her picture. They stared at me. I said, can I be excused? Miss Thomas said, yes, son, hurry up and go get that picture. I busted up the stairs, but I stopped like a brick hit a wall. I remembered how mad and crazy Herman Calloway looked when he yelled at me. I tiptoed the rest of the way. Uh-oh, Herman Calloway's door was open. I held my breath and I tiptoed extra quiet and fast right into the little dead girl's room. And as quiet as I did, whoops, my heart jumped into my stomach. Herman Calloway was sitting on the little chair in front of the little mirror on the dressing table in that room. His elbows were on the table and his face was covered by his hands. It sounds like he was having trouble breathing, because every time he sucked in a bunch of air, he made it sound like, and every time he blew out air, it made it sound like, I didn't know what to do. I could tell Mr. C didn't know I was in the room with him, so I probably just backward tiptoe and get out of there without anything. But I rose up on my toes and I took 2 baby steps and I stopped. I came up here to show Miss Thomas and Miss Jimmy what my mama looked like. There's nothing wrong with that. I wasn't doing anything that I had to sneak out of this room with my tiptoes going backwards. I walked over to the bed, I picked up my sack case, and I set it on top of the bed. I pushed the 2 silver buttons on the side, and the tongues clicked open. Herman Calloway still didn't take his face out of his hands. He kept going, I reached inside the case, and I took out an envelope with Mama's picture in it. I closed the 2 silver tongues again. I could tell Mr. C still wasn't paying me no mind at all. I put my sax case next to the bed and was about to leave the room when I looked at his back. He didn't know I was still in the room with him. He looked at the little round mirror and he could see his face. I still couldn't see his face, but I could see his hands. I could see 6 little trails of water coming out from where his fingers joined up with his hands. 3 trails from each one. Shucks, Herman Calloway was bawling his eyes out. He was acting like me being his grandson was the worst news anyone could ever give him. This was number 39 of Bud Caldwell's rules of things to have a funner life and make a better liar out of yourself. The older you get, the worse something has to be to make you cry. Rule number 39. With babies, it's just easy to not pay a manly mind because they're crying and they're talking for a baby. A baby's tears might mean, hey, you just stuck a pin in my behind me to change my diaper. Or the cry might say, good morning, Mama. What are we going to do today? It makes it easy not to care too much about a baby's tears. But when you got an old person crying, you got a whole nother story. When you get someone has old Herman crying, you better look around because you know you're square in the middle of a boiling tragedy. You can't help feel but sorry for him. I walked over to Herman Calloway, and before I could think, my hand moved towards his back. I waited for one of those spaces between the muzz and the huzz, and I touched him. His skin under his shirt was very warm. It took a second for him to know someone was touching him. When he knew, I felt his skin jerk and twitch. When he saw it was me, he jerked away, took one more giant hug, and then he stared. His mouth started moving like he was talking in a secret language only dogs could hear. A last real American word started coming out of his mouth. He said, I'm so, look, buddy, it's Bud, sir, not Buddy. He put his face back in his hands and he broke down all over again. Man, it's a good thing the thug wasn't around, because if he ever heard the way Mr. C was weeping right now, he'd wonder who the real Waterworks Willie was. I put my hand on his shoulder and I patted him and I rubbed him a couple times and then I left the room. Felt a lot better going out frontwards instead of sneaking backwards. I ran down the steps into the kitchen. Miss Thomas and Mr. Jimmy's eyes jumped right on the envelope. Both of them just looked at it before Miss Thomas reached out and picked it up. She went to the pocket of her dress and took out some funny little glasses that had half bottom to them, and she put them to her nose. She pulled her mama's picture out, my mama's picture out. She looked at the picture, looked over her glasses and then me, looked at Mr. Jimmy and said, any more questions for the young man? She slid the picture over to him. He picked it up. Well, I'll be. Remember that old con man who used to drag that ruined horse through town? What was his name? Help me out here, Grace. Didn't he call Zach Joey Pegasus and Brokeback Bronking Bucko? It was Joey Pegasus and his Brokeback Bucking Bronco, James. Yes, what else do you see in the picture? Oh, that is definitely Angela Janet Calloway. You sure this is your mama? Yes, sir, but her name's Caldwell, not Calloway. Well, there's little doubt about that, James, but what we've got to do, she kept on talking, and I quit listening because something just came out of the blue and gave me a good whop right on my forehead. Without even thinking about what I'd doing, I'd butted in on Miss Thomas and said, That means that's not some little dead girl's room I'm sleeping in. That's my mama's room. She looked at me kind of surprised, like it was the first time she'd thought about it too. She said, Well, that's right, Bud. You're back in your mama's room. I said, how come Herman Calloway never called on me and my mother? All he'd have to do was call us one time, and I know she wouldn't have been so sad. Miss Thomas and Mr. Jimmy took turns shooting quick looks at each other and said, Bud, give me your hand. Uh-oh, pretty soon I'd have to come up with rules and things about when Miss Thomas holds your hands. She stretched her arms across the table, and I held onto her fingers. Bud, Mr. C, excuse me, your granddad. He didn't know anything about you. No one knew where your mother had gone. Mr. Jimmy said, That's right, son. She just up and ran off one day. I mean, we all knew Herman was hard on her, but it wasn't like it was nothing personal. He was hard on everybody. I used to tell him all the time, slack off on the girl, go easy. But I remember his exact words. He said, easy going, don't make the mare run. This is a hard world, especially for a Negro woman. There's 100 million folks out there, every shade of hue, both male and female, who are just dying to be harder on her than I ever could be. So she's got to be ready. Shoot, I could see the girl wasn't the type. Miss Thomas interrupted. James, why don't you go check on Herman? She said, why don't you? Before it wasn't a question. Mr. Jimmy said, maybe I should. And he left the kitchen. Miss Thomas told me, Bud, I know you can see your granddad has troubles getting along with a lot of people. Yes, ma'am. I think it's because he expects so much out of everybody, himself included. And when you set your standards so high, you get let down a lot. I shook my head up and down, acting like I understood. Now take your mother, for instance. He was so proud of that young woman. He loved her very much. He was determined she was going to be the first Calloway to get schooling all the way through college. So he thought he had to be strict on her. He went overboard. Bud, it's just as simple as that. He used to crow about how his mother and father had been born slaves, and now it was only 2 generations later the Callaways had come far and worked hard that one of them was actually going to be a teacher. It was his dream, but it wasn't hers. Not yet, anyway. And he never gave her time to even try to pick it for herself. The more he pushed her, the more she fought him. Finally, it got to be too much, and she left. She ran off with one of Herman's drummers. We've been hoping for 11 years that she'd send some word or come home. And she finally has. Looks to me like she sent us the best word we've had in years. Miss Thomas smiled at me, and I knew she was trying to say that I was the word that Mama sent to them. She said, "No, wait here for a second, Precious. I've got to get something from my room." Miss Thomas was probably saying that as an excuse so she could blow her nose and cry, but she came back holding an iron picture frame. "This has been on my dressing table for 13 years, Bud, ever since your mother was 16 years old, but now it belongs to you." I wanted to say thank you, but I stared at the picture iron frame. It was Mama. The picture only showed her head. All around the edges it was foggy, so it looked like she'd poked her head out of a cloud. And Mama was smiling. The same soft smile she'd give me when she got home from work. It had been so long since I'd seen Mama smile, I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. "Let me show you something, Bud." She took the frame out of my hands. "Watch this." She moved the picture up, down, left, right, and circle. "Do you see how the eyes are all the same? On you, all the same? No matter which way you look at the picture, she's watching. I can keep this? I feel like I've been holding on to it until the rightful owner came along. And it looks like, to me, it's finally shown up. What took you so long?" Miss Thomas patted me under my chin. "But, Bud, we've got a problem I'm going to need your help with. You were 6 years old when your mother died." "Yes, ma'am." "Okay, that was 4 years ago." "Yes, ma'am." "You can remember how bad you felt when you first knew she was gone, right?" "Oh, yes, ma'am, because it still feels kind of the same." "Well, you've had 4 years to heal that scar a little bit, and it hurts sometimes, doesn't it?" "Sometimes a lot," I said. "I know, but remember, your grandfather just found out she passed. This is a brand new hurt for him, and for us. I can't even though she hasn't been seen here, even though he hasn't seen her in 11 years, I know there isn't a day that goes by he doesn't think about her. He never admitted, but there isn't one show that we give that he doesn't look out first in the audience, not to see how big the crowd is, but hoping that she'll be out there. Hoping she'd have a flyer tacked to a telephone pole somewhere and he'd see it. He loved her so much, Bud. I'm sorry, sweetheart." She took the hand she wasn't swinging and she took out a handkerchief and blew her nose. "These stones that he picks up everywhere he performs are for her. She must have been 4 or 5 years old. The band was getting ready to travel to Chicago for a week, and before we left, he asked her what she wanted him to bring back to her. He was thinking a doll or a dress, but she said, 'A rock, Daddy. I want you to bring back a walk from Chicago.' So everywhere he went after that, he'd get her a walk. He'd write the city and the day on it. We were there for her. He has boxes of them upstairs, 11 years worth. So, Bud, I don't know how Herman is going to be feeling after this. This is where I need your help. You've got to remember that both Herman and I love your mother just as much as you do." This didn't seem like it could be true. Not because anyone could love my mother as much as I do, because it didn't seem Herman Calloway could love, period. "So if you can remember, Mud, be patient with him. That ornery old man upstairs is very, very hurt right now. And I can't say where he's going to land after this news gets through blowing him around. So we're going to have to give him some time. We're going to have to let him find out how he feels before... Grace, he wants you." Herman Calloway was looking at everybody like they had blues. It looked like Mr. Jimmy just wiped some tears from his eyes, too. Miss Thomas came around my side of the table and gave me a hug. "You okay?" "Yes, ma'am." She said, "Should I see how he's doing?" "Oh, yes, ma'am." She left the kitchen and Mr. Jimmy went to the living room. I picked Mama's picture up and I put it back in the envelope. Mr. C chose a good name for this house, because not a second went before the back door came open. The dusky devastators of depression walked in like it was going out of style. Doodoo-Bug said, "Hey, Sleepy LeBone, where's everybody at?" I didn't want to embarrass anyone by saying all the grown folks sitting in the house sobbing their eyes out. He said, "They're around." I remembered not to call him sir. Steady Eddie said, "Well, it's you we wanted anyway." He put an old cardboard suitcase on the table. I told the fellas how hard you'd been hitting that recorder and how proud I was of you, so we put a couple of nickels together. He acted like he was yelling into the other room. And Lord knows on the peanuts we get it was a real sacrifice. He slapped some skin with Dirty Deed and they started talking regular again. Anyway, the thug saw something at the pawn shop and we picked it up for you. Can I open it? Well, if you don't, I don't know who will. He slid the cardboard suitcase over in front of me. It looked worse than the one that I used to carry around. It's what's inside that's interesting. Just pull on the snaps hard. I knew the boy's just too country and he used to handle fine merchandise. We should have given it to him in a paper bag. I opened the suitcase, whatever was wrapped up in crinkly newspapers, and I pulled the newspapers off and I could tell their gift was heavy. All of a sudden, a shiny piece of gold showed through. I couldn't believe it. The dusky devastators had put their money together to bought me a baby-sized saxophone horn like Steady Eddie's. Steady Eddie could see I was stuck, so he lifted it out of the suitcase and fitted the bag for the mouthpiece and the neck and the reed holder. He sucked on the reed for a minute, and he put the horn together, and he played it. It sounded great. It's an alto, bud. There's a little rust inside some of the seams. That's to be expected with a horn this old. But it's got a good tone to it. This dent didn't throw off too much. I repatted, I refelted it, and I resprung it. The rest is up to you. He reached his hand in his pocket and he took out a can that said Brasso on the side. Get a rag and shine her up, okay? A man should polish his own horn. I looked at my bandmates. I said, thank you very much. I'll practice on this so much I'll be as good as you guys in 3 weeks. Ooh, that's cold, said Doodlebug. Really, I will. The band laughed, and so I did too. Well, Mr. LeBone, said Eddie, I'll tell you what. Since you're so hot to get in this band, I better bet you started on lessons right away. He pulled out a silver watch that was tied to a long chain, and he said, I'm going to Tyler's for a while now. I'll be back at 7. If you got your axe polished by then, I'll bring you sheet music along, and we can get started. Sound good? Sounds great, Steady. Eddie took the strap off his neck, and he handed it to me. I put it on Eddie, and Eddie handed my saxophone to me for the first time. It was perfect weight. Can I be excused? What, you ain't going to blow us some notes? We want to hear what you got, Mr. 3 weeks from now? I'll let you hear me in 3 weeks when we're all on the stage together. They laughed again. I'm going to let you in on something. Sleepy LeBone, there's a certain member of the band that you'll be out playing in 3 weeks, but it's going to take you a whole lot longer to top me. On the real tip, it's going to take you at least 10 years before you even hold my drumsticks. Steady Eddie said, yeah, that's about 9 years and 10 months longer than you'll be with the band, Thug. Thug, aw, man, you ain't going to start that up again. You got to let me know what you heard. I said, can I be excused? Eddie said, go on ahead, Sleepy LeBone. I'll be back. I told my bandmates, thank you again. Thank you very much. Nothing to it, little man, said the thug. Dirty Deed said, don't let that horn whip you, son. Doodlebug said, it was our pleasure, Sleepy. Steady Eddie said, man, get out of here. I picked up both of Mama's pictures, my horn, and the can of Brasso, and I ran upstairs. When I got upstairs, I saw that Herman Calloway's door was still open a crack, Miss Thomas's door was closed, and I could hear the two of them in her room talking soft to each other. I could have stood outside that door and listened if I wanted to, but it would have been rude. Besides, I didn't know how long it would take me to polish this new horn. I went to Mama's room and I put my sax on the bed that Mom used to sleep in when she was a little girl, and I put her smiling picture on the dressing table. Then I reached under bed and I put out my sax case again. I snapped the 2 silver snaps and started taking out all my things. I took out my blanket and remade my bed with it. I wasn't going to need to carry it around anymore. I opened the tobacco pouch and took out the rock that said Flint and set it on the bed. I took out the flyers and walked down the hall to Herman Calloway's room. Even though I could still hear him and Miss Thomas boo-hooing in her room, I knocked on the door anyway. And I opened it. He had one of those dressing tables with a mirror stuck on the back of it too. So I walked real quick over to it and I set the flyers and the bag of 4 rocks down. I got out of the room as fast as I could. Phew! Even though it was me who carried around them all these years, you'd have to be a pretty big liar if you'd say those rocks and flyers really belonged to me. Herman Calloway's name was all over the flyers, and his writing was all over the rocks. Besides, the way he looked so shook up when he saw those rocks for the first time, I figured they meant more to him than me anyway. I went back over to Mama's dressing table and I opened the little drawer. I took out one of the thumbtacks out and I went back to Mama's bed. Next, I took out an envelope that had her picture in it. I took out the picture of her riding that sad, saggy pony. I still couldn't see what she was so unhappy about. That misbegotten Moon Park looked like somewhere you could have had a lot of fun. I poked the thumbtack in the top of Mama's picture and I walked to the wall she had stuck the pictures of horses on. I put Mama right amongst the ponies and the horses she liked so much. I didn't need to carry that doggone picture around. This wasn't how I remembered Mama anyway. Mama was always excited and jumpy, not saddy and pokey like this little girl. Mama was kind of old when I met her, too. She wasn't young like in this picture. The picture looked like it belonged to that collection. It's strange. The way things turn out here, I've been carrying Mama around all this time, and I finally put her somewhere she wanted to be, back in her own bedroom, back amongst her horses. I went back to bed and I picked up the flint rock up. It was going to be enough. I didn't need those other things with me all the time. I didn't need to be reminded of Mama. I couldn't think about her anymore if there were 100 hours in a day and 1,000 hours in a week. I couldn't think of my Mama any better than I already do. All I have to do is remember her hand on my forehead when she'd ask me something like, "Baby, are you sick? Have you got a temperature?" All I have to do is remember Mama letting me dry dishes after she washed them, or how she used to say no one in the world could dry a plate the way I could. All I have to do is take 2 or 3 deep breaths and think of all the books she read to me at night. No matter how long it took she'd read, I went to sleep. Deeza Malone was right. I was carrying Mama inside me, and there wasn't anyone or anything that could take that away from me. The one rock from Flint would be enough, and I put it in my saxophone case. I picked it up. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. I wet the reed the same way I'd seen Steady Eddie do, and I clamped it on the mouthpiece. I closed my eyes and counted to 10. After I got to 10, I blew the horn, and it actually sounded pretty good. I knew I'd be playing along with the Dusky Devastators in a week or 2. If it didn't sound so good, it meant I'd have to practice for a couple of months to be good enough to get on stage with that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I puffed my cheeks and blew as hard as I could, and it only squeaked and groaned and squawked, and it sounded like some words like aronk, razuga, and balupa. Well, maybe if I didn't puff my cheeks out right, maybe I was blowing too hard. I counted again and tried again. This time it only squeaked and squawked and groaned. It didn't sound so great. It wasn't perfect like when Steady blew it. I could tell that one day it was going to be, though. Something told me I could learn how to play this. Something told me that these sounds were just bad notes. If you didn't have a real good imagination, you'd probably think those noises were the sound of some kid blowing a horn for the first time. But I knew better than that. I could tell that those were the squeaks and squawks of one door closing and another door opening. I looked at the picture Mama and Miss Thomas gave me. Mama was looking right at me with that same soft smile. I know it's stupid to smile back at a picture, but I couldn't help myself. I know it's stupid to talk to a picture, but I started a conversation. I had to say, "Here we go again, Mama. Only this time, I can't wait." I closed my eyes and I began practicing. Shucks, as good as things were going for me now, I bet you dollars to donuts Steady Eddie was going to get here early. And that is the end of Bud Not Buddy. It's a 23-minute video, so I'm going to leave it here now. I do have other things we're going to read. I'm going to continue to do read aloud videos. I'll announce that because I'm looking at it, considering what to do. I'm thinking about doing some nonfiction each day and doing some reading about incredible people and incredible times. All right. Hope you enjoyed this. We'll talk Monday.